So this video presentation is entitled From Research Idea to Research Question, and hopefully this will help walk you through this process for the purpose of this course. Because it's very important that you actually have a research question, you develop a research question before the end of this module, so that when you start module 2 and the subsequent modules, you actually are working on your research question and developing it into a research proposal. So I can't stress the importance of this as much as I would like to. So again, I want to reference these two readings, and I would encourage you to actually pursue these readings in your university library. So the book, The Research Guide, a primer for residents and other healthcare trainees, is available through the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons, and so we will be using information from that book in this presentation, but also Conceiving the Research Question, Developing the Study Plan is a really important resource. So I would encourage you to look at these readings and dig deeper into this topic. So the outline of this presentation is, first of all, strategies for finding a research idea, and then secondly, turning the research idea that you have into a research question, and then finally the last bit is revising your research question until you're happy that you can work with it for your research proposal. So in terms of the first thing is strategies for finding a research idea. So you need to start with a research interest. Where can you find your ideas, practical considerations, and what are the characteristics of a good research idea? So start with a research interest. So what are you passionate about? Is there something in healthcare, something that's intrigued you? Do you have particular patient stories? What about your own personal experience? What about your family's health experience? So something you'd like to learn more about. And I can't emphasize this enough. So many people, they are interested in a research topic, and it's because of their own personal experience with something. So for example, my mother had long-standing insulin-dependent diabetes, so I was always very fascinated with the healthcare delivered to people with diabetes. So something that you're passionate about. I spent time as a prison physician for many years, so of course I started getting passionate about research in prison health. Alternatively, it might be a research methodology that you'd like to build capacity in. So it might be some type of research methods that you've never done before that you really want to learn more about. That's a great way to start on a research project, because we all know that through the research process we learn so much, because we start off just having done a course or read a book or something, and then we launch into it. So where can you find your idea? So what topic are you going to start with out of all the myriad of possible ideas? So yes, we can look at published literature, we can see literature that's being published, and then we can get intrigued by something. And invariably in a published study, when you get to the discussion, it always says more research is needed on this and this and this. So there's lots of ideas in published literature. If you're fortunate to be working with established researchers or mentors or experts, they have lots of ideas. You only just have to spend a day with them and they'll come up with, this idea or this idea or this idea for a research project. Meetings and conferences, often that will stimulate your curiosity. Granting agencies, if you troll through granting agencies and see what things they've funded, you get an idea of what interesting topics are out there. And if you're a healthcare provider yourself, or you've had opportunity to volunteer or to assist in a healthcare environment, you can approach every single clinical encounter or every encounter with a client with observant, a skeptical, a curious, a creative mind. I encourage you to keep a journal or write it down in your iPad or whatever you're using to sort of keep notes of things. But I certainly found when I was a family physician that just about every clinical encounter engendered in me multiple questions that I wanted to go and look up. And so many of those questions didn't have answers that were already published, so they were just fodder for research projects. And then finally, if you really are running out of ideas and you really are desperate, we have started to develop a bank of clinical scenarios. So these are just 100-word summaries of clinical scenarios that you can look through and decide if you want to pick up one of those to actually use for this course, to develop your research question and then to build your research proposal on. So look for those, and those are available to you all. And it doesn't matter if several of you pick the same one. I'm sure you will, each of you, discover different ways of actually examining that clinical scenario. So then practically, when you've kind of narrowed some ideas down, you then have to start thinking about the practical things. Like, think about your own timeline. Like, is this actually, are you going to have time to do this project? What are your resources, or what resources are needed? And then how common is the condition? So if you're actually looking at a particular condition that you want to study, if it's a very, very rare condition, then you might only be able to find one, a few patients that are, or clients that are, have that condition, and you might decide that you want to actually hone your study down, that you're actually doing a case study on one person or one family rather than doing a larger study. So when you're looking at refining a research idea or a research question, there are, we call it FINER criteria, so FINER. So I'll just go through these. The first one is feasible. So when you're looking at developing your research idea, you have to think, is this feasible? Is it fundable? Is it affordable? Are there clients available or participants available that can be researched? You have to think about the scope. Is it too big? And also, do you need technical expertise that is beyond your scope or beyond those that you know? Interesting is the I. It has to be interesting. It has to be interesting for you because you're going to be spending a lot of time on it. You might want to chat around with your peers to say, is it interesting to you and other people? Is there interest in this? Novel. So there's nothing worse than embarking on a research project to find out that actually what you're doing is actually not novel, that somebody's already done it. So you want to see if anybody else has done it in the world through the published literature. So you want to be able to contribute in new. But if somebody has already done it, then you want to know if what you're doing is confirming or refuting the previous findings. But also, if it's been done in another country but hasn't been done in your location, then you want to see if it actually is similar in the population that you're dealing with. The E stands for ethical, and so you have to think about ethical issues of your research in terms of integrity and justice and beneficence. The physical risks or invasions of privacy, and obviously all research projects that involve humans, you have to be applying for a research ethics board to review your project before you can proceed. And so we'll be giving more guidance on that in this course. Relevant. So is this project that you're doing, is it actually going to have any significant impacts on knowledge or policy or clinical practice? Will it lead to any changes in methods or health or clinical services? So the next topic is types of questions. So there are a number of different types of questions that you can look at generating. You can look at estimates of prevalence for a health condition. You can look at estimates of determining whether or not a diagnostic test is accurate. You can look at generating hypotheses, and then you look to see whether exposure and outcome. For example, you could look at associations between exposure and outcome to actually to generate hypotheses, or you can actually test hypotheses. So you can actually look at whether or not something causes something else. So that would be something like a randomized controlled trial. As I mentioned before, you can do a confirmatory study. So a previous study has been done, maybe as a pilot or in a different population, and you want to replicate that to see if you can confirm the previous findings. And then you can also look at doing a type of project where you'd be taking some knowledge that was gained from a previous research project, and you'd be looking at ways that you might integrate that knowledge into practice, into medical health practice. And then the next topic is actually generating an operational research question. So when you're looking at developing a research question, one way to think about framing the question or thinking about what you're doing is to think about the who, what, when, where, why, and how. So the who would be the population that you're going to be looking at. The what is what you're going to be doing. Are you doing an intervention? Are you exposing some part of the population to something? Are you looking at a particular type of behavior? You're looking at the when, you're looking at the time frame. Obviously, you have to limit the time frame. You're looking at the setting. You're looking at why you're doing this, what's the rationale, and how are you going to do this, the methods and the methodology. And classically in health, we also formulate questions that are PICO questions. So if we have a sort of clinical scenario or some dissonance that we come across in clinical practice, we want to search the established literature to see if this has been looked at. And so we will be forming questions that have the population in it, the intervention in it, the control in it, the outcome, and the time frame. And there is more detail on PICO questions later on in the course. Once you've started to draft your research question, you've picked your clinical scenario and the topic that you want to do, you've thought about what you want to test, whether you're actually generating a hypothesis or testing a hypothesis or determining a sort of prevalence or what you're trying to do, and you've started formulating a question that's based on your PICO and based on the finer, then start getting advice. So it's an iterative process. It's not like it just comes out of your head and boom, it's done. You actually need to get a lot of input on it. So you want to be running it by your peers and your mentors. We invite you to put it onto the DHRMC discussion board, invite feedback from the learners who you're signed up with, your peers. As you do your literature search, you might be actually refining your question, and then you might actually be looking at pre-testing components of the study, and then you might actually go back and actually refine your research question. So it really is an iterative process. But you do need to start with something. So you start with something and then you continue to refine it as you move through developing your research proposal.